Sarah Mitchell had always believed that life had a way of working itself out. Her mother had told her that once, years ago, when Sarah was worried about college applications. "Things have a way of falling into place, sweetheart," her mother had said, brushing Sarah's hair back from her face. Sarah had believed it then. She didn't believe it anymore. Standing on the bridge at midnight, Sarah's fingers gripped the cold metal railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The city spread out below her, a carpet of lights that seemed to belong to a world she was no longer part of. Somewhere down there, people were sleeping in warm beds. They were planning their tomorrows, thinking about weekend trips, worrying about normal things like traffic and grocery lists. Sarah couldn't remember what normal felt like anymore. It had been 3 weeks since her mother's funeral. 3 weeks since Sarah had stood in a half-empty church, listening to a minister who had never met her mother say generic things about eternal rest and God's plan. There had been maybe 15 people there. Most of them were her mother's co-workers from the library where she'd worked for 30 years. Sarah's father had left when she was 6. No siblings. No extended family that cared enough to make the trip. Just Sarah alone, saying goodbye to the only person who had ever really loved her. The medical bills had come even before the funeral expenses. Sarah still didn't understand how it was possible to owe so much money. Her mother had insurance, but apparently not enough. Cancer treatment was expensive. End-of-life care was expensive. Dying, it turned out, cost a fortune. Sarah had depleted her savings first, then maxed out her credit cards, then took out a loan she had no idea how she would ever repay. And still the bills kept coming. 2 months before her mother died, Sarah had lost her job. The design firm where she'd worked for 7 years had gone through restructuring. That was the word they'd used. Restructuring. As if rearranging the furniture somehow made it okay to throw people's livelihoods away. They'd offered her 2 weeks of severance pay and a generic letter of recommendation. She'd been looking for work ever since, but nobody was hiring. Or rather, nobody was hiring a 34-year-old graphic designer who'd missed the last 3 weeks of work because she was at the hospital watching her mother fade away. Losing the apartment had been the final blow. Without a job, Sarah couldn't make rent. Her landlord had been understanding at first, but understanding only went so far when you had bills of your own to pay. She'd been given 30 days' notice. That was 2 weeks ago. Now everything she owned was crammed into the back of her 12-year-old Honda Civic. And she'd been sleeping in the car in different parking lots, moving every night so nobody would notice. Tonight, she'd finally admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny for days. She couldn't do this anymore. She was tired. So incredibly tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being alone. Tired of waking up each morning and having to figure out where to brush her teeth, where to change her clothes, how to make another day happen when she had no reason to believe tomorrow would be any different from today. The wind picked up, cutting through her thin jacket. Sarah had sold her winter coat last week for $40. $40 that had gone to gas and a few meals from fast food dollar menus. She'd lost weight. Her jeans hung loose on her hips and she'd had to punch a new hole in her belt to keep them up. When had she last eaten a real meal? She couldn't remember. Her phone had been shut off 3 days ago. One less bill she couldn't pay. It sat in her pocket now, a useless piece of metal and glass that couldn't even dial 911 anymore. Not that she wanted to dial 911, she didn't want to be saved. She wanted this to be over. Sarah looked down at the water far below. The river was black in the darkness, moving silently. She wondered how cold it would be. She wondered if it would hurt or if it would be quick. She wondered if anyone would even notice she was gone. Would her landlord wonder what happened to her? Would her former co-workers see something about it on the news and think, "Oh, that's sad"? Would anyone cry? Her mother would have cried. Her mother would have been devastated. But her mother was gone, and that was the whole problem. Without her mother, Sarah was completely alone in the world. There was no safety net, no one to call when things got bad, no one who cared whether she lived or died. She thought about her mother's last words. Sarah had been sitting beside the hospital bed, holding her mother's hand, which had become so thin and fragile it felt like holding a small bird. Her mother had opened her eyes, those eyes that had once been so full of life and warmth but had faded to something distant and tired. "I'm sorry," her mother had whispered. "Don't be sorry, Mom. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm sorry I'm leaving you alone." Sarah had squeezed her hand gently. "You're not leaving me. You're just going ahead. I'll see you again someday." Her mother had smiled, just slightly. "Not too soon, I hope." Promise me you'll live, Sarah, really live. Promise me you'll find something worth holding on to. Sarah had promised. She'd promised because that's what you do when someone is dying. You tell them what they need to hear. But now, standing on this bridge, that promise felt like a chain around her neck. She'd tried to live. She'd tried to find something worth holding on to. But there was nothing. Just emptiness and exhaustion and the certain knowledge that tomorrow would only bring more of the same. She climbed up onto the lower railing, her heart pounding now. This was it. This was how it ended. 34 years, and it all came down to this moment on a cold bridge in the middle of the night. She'd read somewhere that your life was supposed to flash before your eyes at the end. But all Sarah could see was darkness and the long drop below. She took a breath, then another. Her legs were shaking. Was she really going to do this? Yes, she was. There was no other way out. No other escape from the crushing weight of everything that had gone wrong. She closed her eyes, and then she heard it. A baby's cry. At first, Sarah thought she'd imagined it. But no, there it was again. High-pitched and desperate, coming from somewhere below the bridge. A baby was crying in the darkness. Sarah's eyes snapped open. What was a baby doing out here at midnight? She looked around, trying to locate the sound. It was coming from beneath the bridge, down by the riverbank where homeless people sometimes made camps in the shadows. The crying continued, and with it came another sound. A voice, a girl's voice, weak and strained. Help. Someone help. Sarah's grip on the railing loosened. Every instinct told her to climb down, to find that baby, to help. But another part of her, the part that had brought her to this bridge, whispered that it wasn't her problem. She had her own problems. She had her own pain. She couldn't save anyone. She couldn't even save herself. The baby's cries grew more frantic. Sarah stood frozen, caught between two impossible choices: let go and fall, or climb back and face another tomorrow in a life that had become unbearable. But that baby needed help, and regardless of how much Sarah hurt, regardless of how much she wanted to give up, she couldn't ignore a child in distress. Her mother had raised her better than that. With trembling legs, Sarah climbed back down from the railing. Her feet touched solid ground, and for a moment she just stood there, breathing hard, not quite believing what she'd just done. Then she heard the cry again and started moving toward it. She made her way down the embankment carefully in the darkness, using her phone's dying battery to cast a weak light. The ground was uneven, scattered with trash and broken glass. She could see shapes now in the shadows beneath the bridge. Cardboard boxes arranged to form makeshift walls. A shopping cart filled with plastic bags. And there, in the corner, wrapped in a dirty blanket, a teenage girl lay motionless on the ground. Beside her, in a small bundle, a baby wailed. "Hey," Sarah called out, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Hey, are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. Sarah knelt beside her and felt for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. The girl was breathing, but she wouldn't wake up. Sarah turned to the baby, who couldn't have been more than a few months old. His face was red from crying, his tiny fists waving in the air. Without thinking, Sarah picked him up. He was so small, so light. She held him against her chest, and the warmth of his tiny body against hers was startling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd held another living thing. The baby continued to cry, but softer now, as if he sensed he was no longer alone. Sarah looked at the unconscious girl, then at the baby in her arms, then back up at the bridge where she'd been standing just minutes ago. Her own pain hadn't disappeared. Her own problems hadn't magically solved themselves. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was this child who needed help. What mattered was this girl who couldn't help herself. Sarah pulled out her dead phone and swore softly. Then she looked around and spotted a light in the distance, maybe a quarter-mile away. A gas station. They would have a phone. She wrapped the baby more securely in his blanket, looked at the unconscious girl one more time, and made a decision. "I'll be right back," she promised. "I'm going to get help." She started running toward that distant light, the baby clutched against her chest, and for the first time in months, Sarah Mitchell felt something other than despair. She felt purpose. The fluorescent lights of the gas station were harsh after the darkness beneath the bridge. Sarah burst through the door, breathless and wild-eyed, the baby still crying in her arms. The clerk behind the counter, a young man with headphones around his neck, looked up in alarm. "Please," Sarah gasped. "I need to call 911. There's a girl under the bridge. She's unconscious." "And this baby?" The clerk was already reaching for the phone. Here, use this. He dialed the numbers and handed her the receiver, his eyes wide with concern. Sarah's hands shook as she reported everything to the dispatcher. The location, the unconscious girl, the baby. Yes, the baby seemed okay now, just crying earlier. No, she didn't know what was wrong with the girl. Please, just send someone quickly. 10 minutes later, Sarah was back under the bridge, the clerk having followed her with a flashlight and a bottle of water. The girl still hadn't moved. Sarah knelt beside her again, the baby now quiet in her arms, his wide eyes staring up at her face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. In the beam of the flashlight, Sarah could see the girl more clearly now. She was young, maybe 17 at most. Her clothes were dirty and torn. Her face was pale and there were dark circles under her eyes. Beside her was an empty baby bottle and a few scattered possessions in a backpack. The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing, and suddenly everything was motion and light. Paramedics swarmed around them, checking the girl's vital signs, asking Sarah questions she couldn't answer. Who was this girl? What had happened? Sarah could only shake her head. I don't know. I just heard the baby crying and found them like this. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes, reached for the baby. I'll need to take him, sweetheart. We need to check him over. Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around the small bundle. She didn't want to let go. It surprised her, this sudden protective surge. But the paramedic was right. The baby needed to be examined. Reluctantly, Sarah handed him over and watched as he was carried to the ambulance. Is she going to be okay? Sarah asked, nodding toward the girl who was being lifted onto a stretcher. We're taking her to Memorial Hospital, the paramedic said. Are you family? No, I found them. You probably saved their lives, the paramedic said softly. Another hour out here in the cold and it might have been too late. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Looks like she hasn't eaten in days. Sarah watched as both the girl and the baby were loaded into the ambulance. A police officer approached her, notebook in hand, and asked her to explain what had happened. Sarah told him everything, except the part about why she'd been on that bridge. That was something she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. After giving her statement, Sarah was told she could go, but she found she didn't want to leave. Instead, she asked the officer which hospital they were being taken to, and then she walked back to her car. The sun would be up in a few hours. She should try to sleep. But sleep felt impossible now. Sarah drove to Memorial Hospital and sat in the parking lot as dawn broke over the city. The sky turned from black to deep blue to pink and gold. She watched people coming and going, nurses ending their night shifts, doctors arriving for morning rounds, visitors carrying flowers and balloons. All these lives, all these stories, and she was just one more person sitting alone in a car trying to figure out what came next. But something had shifted inside her. She couldn't name it exactly, but it was there. Maybe it was the way the baby had looked at her, those dark eyes so trusting. Maybe it was knowing that if she'd made a different choice on that bridge, that girl and baby might not have survived the night. Maybe it was realizing that her mother's last request, to find something worth holding on to, had been answered in the most unexpected way. Around 9 in the morning, Sarah went inside the hospital. She asked at the information desk about the girl who'd been brought in from beneath the bridge. The volunteer, an elderly woman with silver hair, made some calls and told her the girl was in stable condition on the 4th floor, but only family could visit. I'm the one who found her, Sarah said. I just want to know if she's okay. The woman's expression softened. Let me see what I can do. 20 minutes later, Sarah was standing outside a hospital room, being briefed by a social worker named Jennifer Chen. The girl's name was Maria Rodriguez. She was 16 years old and had been living on the streets for 4 months. She'd run away from a foster home. The baby was her son, Lucas, 3 months old. Maria had been doing her best to care for him, but she'd been too proud or too scared to ask for help. By the time Sarah found them, Maria had gone 2 days without food, giving what little she had to the baby. Can I see her? Sarah asked. Jennifer hesitated. She's awake, but she's very fragile right now. Emotionally, I mean. Are you sure you want to? You've already done so much, and I'm sure. The hospital room was small and sterile, filled with the beeping of monitors. Maria lay in the bed looking even younger and more fragile than she had in the darkness beneath the bridge. An IV was connected to her arm. In the corner, in a clear plastic bassinet, baby Lucas slept peacefully. When Maria saw Sarah enter, her eyes widened with recognition. "You," she whispered. "You're the one who—" Sarah nodded and moved closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Maria's voice was hoarse. "But they said I'm going to be okay. And Lucas is healthy. That's what matters." Her eyes filled with tears. I thought we were going to die out there. I couldn't stay awake anymore. I heard Lucas crying, but I couldn't move. And then you came." Sarah didn't know what to say. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "What happened? How did you end up beneath that bridge?" And Maria told her. It was a story Sarah had heard versions of before. A story too common, too sad. Maria's mother had died when she was 12. She'd gone into foster care. The first home had been okay. The second had been terrible. She didn't want to go into details about what had happened there, and Sarah didn't push. Maria had run away and met a boy who said he loved her. By the time she realized he didn't, she was pregnant. He disappeared when she told him about the baby. "I thought I could do it on my own," Maria said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I got a job at a fast food place. I saved up. But then I started showing, and they fired me. They said it was because I was late too much, but I know why. After Lucas was born, I tried everything. Shelters were full. The waiting lists were months long. I tried to stay with friends, but everyone's struggling. Nobody has room for a teenage mom and a baby, so we ended up on the streets." Sarah listened, her heart breaking for this girl who was barely more than a child herself. "What about your family? Don't you have anyone?" Maria shook her head. "My mom was it, and she's gone." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "My mom was it, and she's gone." Maria could have been speaking for Sarah. They were different in so many ways, different ages, different circumstances, but in the way that mattered most, they were exactly the same. Both alone, both grieving, both trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to grind them down. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "I know what that's like. I lost my mom too. Recently." Maria looked at her with new understanding. "Is that why you were there? Under the bridge in the middle of the night?" Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, to make up some excuse, but the lie wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself telling Maria the truth. All of it, the job loss, the medical bills, the eviction, living in her car, standing on that bridge. She told this 16-year-old girl things she hadn't told anyone, because somehow in this sterile hospital room, with a baby sleeping in the corner, it felt safe to finally say out loud how badly she'd been hurting. When Sarah finished, Maria reached out and took her hand. "You saved us," she said. "But maybe Lucas saved you too." Sarah looked over at the sleeping baby. He was so tiny, so perfect. His little chest rose and fell with each breath. His tiny fingers were curled into loose fists, and as if sensing her gaze, he opened his eyes and looked directly at her, and then he smiled. It was a real smile, not just gas or a random facial movement. His whole face lit up, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his mouth forming a perfect curve. He smiled at Sarah as if he knew her, as if he was saying thank you, as if he was reminding her that there were still good things in the world worth living for. Sarah felt something break open inside her chest. Tears started flowing, and once they started, she couldn't stop them. She cried for her mother. She cried for herself. She cried for Maria and Lucas. She cried for every moment of pain and fear and loneliness she'd been carrying, and through it all, that baby just kept smiling at her. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, trying to wipe her face. "I don't know why I'm—" "It's okay," Maria said gently. "It's okay to cry." A nurse came in to check Maria's vitals, and Sarah stepped out into the hallway to compose herself. Jennifer, the social worker, was waiting outside. "Are you all right?" Jennifer asked. Sarah nodded, still wiping her eyes. "What's going to happen to them?" "To Maria and Lucas." Jennifer sighed. "Maria will need to stay here for a few days while we get her strength back. After that, we'll try to find her placement in a transitional housing program. There are some facilities that take teen mothers with children. The waiting list can be long, but we'll do our best. And in the meantime? In the meantime, she'll probably end up in emergency foster care. It's not ideal, but it's better than the streets." Sarah thought about Maria's story, about the foster home she'd run from. What if she doesn't want to go back into the system? "She doesn't have much choice," Jennifer said sadly. "She's 16. She's still a minor. And she has a baby to think about. Child services will be involved whether she likes it or not." Sarah stood there in the hospital hallway thinking about choices. about how sometimes the choices we're given aren't really choices at all, about how easy it is to fall through the cracks when you don't have anyone to catch you. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Sarah asked. "To visit them?" Jennifer smiled. "I think Maria would like that very much." Sarah returned to her car, but this time, sitting in the parking lot didn't feel quite so lonely. She had somewhere to be tomorrow, someone expecting her. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, something was enough. Over the next few days, Sarah visited the hospital every morning. She brought Maria magazines and snacks. She held Lucas while Maria showered or slept. She listened to Maria talk about her dreams. She wanted to get her GED, maybe go to college someday, become a teacher. She wanted to give Lucas the kind of life she'd never had. "You're going to be a great mom," Sarah told her. "I hope so," Maria said. "I'm so scared I'm going to mess him up." "The fact that you're worried about it means you won't," Sarah assured her. "Bad parents don't worry about being bad parents." On the fourth day, Jennifer approached Sarah with a proposition. "Maria's being discharged tomorrow. We found her a spot in a women's shelter across town. It's not perfect, she'll have to share a room with 3 other mothers, and there are strict rules. But it's clean and safe. The problem is she doesn't have any way to get there. Her belongings are still under that bridge, assuming they haven't been thrown away or stolen. I was wondering, would you be willing to help her get settled?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course." The next morning, Sarah picked up Maria and Lucas from the hospital. Maria looked better. She'd gained a few pounds, her color had returned, and she'd been given fresh clothes by the hospital. Lucas was dressed in a donated onesie, wrapped in a new blanket. They looked almost normal, like any young mother and baby heading home, except they weren't heading home. They were heading to a shelter. Sarah drove them across town, listening to Maria chatter nervously about what the shelter would be like, whether the other mothers would be nice, whether Lucas would sleep with all the noise. When they arrived, Sarah helped carry the few belongings Maria had been given by the hospital: some clothes, diapers, formula, a few baby supplies. The shelter was in an old converted school building. It was clean but institutional, with fluorescent lighting and tile floors that echoed with every footstep. A woman named Mrs. Chen ran the place, not Jennifer from the hospital, but another woman, older, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and glasses perched on her nose. Mrs. Chen showed them around efficiently, rattling off rules. Curfew at 9 p.m. Chores were assigned on a rotating schedule. No visitors after 8. Residents were expected to attend daily workshops on job skills and parenting. Stay could be extended up to 3 months if residents showed they were working toward independence. Maria's room was on the 2nd floor. It was small, with 2 bunk beds and 4 narrow lockers. 2 other women were there, one folding laundry, another feeding a toddler in a high chair. They looked up when Maria entered, their faces carefully neutral. "This is Maria," Mrs. Chen announced. "And this is Lucas. Maria, this is your bunk here. Bottom right. You can store your things in this locker." Sarah helped Maria unpack her meager belongings, which took all of 3 minutes. When Mrs. Chen left to give them privacy, Maria sat on her bunk and looked around the room with an expression that was trying hard to be grateful, but couldn't quite hide the disappointment. "It's not so bad," Sarah said, trying to sound encouraging. "You'll have a roof over your head, regular meals, and you can focus on getting your GED." "Yeah," Maria said quietly. Then she looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. For everything. I know you have your own problems, but you've been so kind to us. I don't know what we would have done without you." Sarah sat down beside her on the bunk. "You know what's funny? I think I needed you as much as you needed me." Lucas, lying on the bed between them, looked up at both of them and smiled that smile, the one that had changed everything. "Promise you'll visit?" Maria asked. "I promise." But as Sarah drove away from the shelter, she felt a heaviness settle over her again. She'd helped Maria and Lucas, she'd done something good, but her own problems were still waiting for her. She still had no job. She still had no home. She was still living in her car, still drowning in debt, still just barely hanging on. That night, parked in a grocery store lot, Sarah pulled out the last of her money and counted it. $43. That was all she had left in the world. She needed to find a job fast. But who would hire her? She was basically homeless. She had no address to put on applications. She had no phone number to be reached at. She probably smelled like someone who'd been sleeping in their car. Sarah leaned her head against the steering wheel and felt the despair creeping back in. She'd saved Maria and Lucas, but she couldn't save herself. She'd found a purpose, but purpose didn't pay bills. Purpose didn't put a roof over your head, but she'd made a promise. She'd promised Maria she would visit, and Sarah had learned something in these past few days. She'd learned that sometimes keeping a promise to someone else is what gives you the strength to keep going. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her car with a stiff neck and a determination she hadn't felt in months. She used the last of her gas money to drive to a public library, where she could use the bathroom to wash up and brush her teeth. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her face was gaunt, her hair desperately needed washing, and her clothes were wrinkled from being slept in. But her eyes looked different, less empty than they had been. She spent the day at the library using their computers to search for jobs and submit applications. By closing time, she'd applied to 37 positions, everything from retail to restaurants to cleaning services. Anything that might hire her quickly. Then she drove back to the shelter to visit Maria. The visits became a daily routine. Every afternoon, Sarah would show up at the shelter just as Maria was finishing her parenting class or job skills workshop. She'd hold Lucas while Maria did her homework for her GED prep course. They'd talk about small things. Maria's day, the other women in the shelter, Lucas's latest developments. He was growing fast, becoming more alert, more responsive. Every time Sarah held him, he'd give her that smile, and every time it filled something empty inside her. Mrs. Chen, the shelter director, noticed Sarah's regular visits. One afternoon in the second week, she pulled Sarah aside. "You're here a lot," Mrs. Chen said. It wasn't quite a question, but it expected an answer. "Maria doesn't have anyone else," Sarah replied. "I just want to make sure she's okay." Mrs. Chen studied her with sharp eyes. "And what about you? Are you okay?" Sarah started to give an automatic yes, but something about Mrs. Chen's direct gaze made her hesitate. "I'm managing. You're living in your car, aren't you?" Sarah's face flushed. "How did you—" "I've been doing this work for 30 years, Mrs. Chen said gently. "You learn to see the signs. You're always here at strange times. Your clothes, though clean, are the same ones over and over. You look tired in a way that comes from not sleeping in a real bed, and you spend an awful lot of time in a shelter for someone who's just visiting a friend." Sarah didn't know what to say. She felt exposed, vulnerable. "I'm not judging you," Mrs. Chen continued. "I'm trying to help. We have a few volunteer positions here. Nothing paid, but it comes with benefits. 3 meals a day in the kitchen, access to the showers and laundry, a place to be during the day, and if you prove yourself valuable, sometimes things open up." "I don't want charity," Sarah said quietly. "It's not charity. It's an exchange. We need reliable help, and you need stability. Think about it." Mrs. Chen handed her a card. "Come see me tomorrow morning if you're interested." That night, Sarah sat in her car and looked at the card. Part of her wanted to refuse out of pride. She'd been the one helping Maria, not the one who needed help herself. But pride didn't keep you warm at night. Pride didn't fill your stomach. The next morning, Sarah showed up at Mrs. Chen's office. "I'll do it," she said. "Whatever you need." And just like that, Sarah's life took another turn. She started volunteering at the shelter 20 hours a week. Her main job was coordinating donations, sorting through the endless stream of items people dropped off, organizing them, distributing them to residents who needed them. It was humbling work, going through bags of used clothes and household items, but it was also eye-opening. Sarah saw how much people were willing to give to help those in need. Mrs. Chen also gave her a corner in the storage room where she could keep her personal belongings and told her she was welcome to use the facilities anytime. It wasn't much, but it meant Sarah could finally take regular showers and do her laundry. She could eat hot meals. She had a place to be during the day where she wasn't just sitting in her car or taking up space in the library. More importantly, she got to see Maria and Lucas every day. She watched Maria study for her GED, saw her confidence growing as she made friends with the other mothers in the shelter. She held Lucas during feeding times and celebrated when he laughed for the first time. These small moments, these ordinary interactions became the highlight of Sarah's days. But Sarah was still applying for jobs every chance she got. Weeks passed with no responses. Then finally, after 6 weeks of volunteering, Mrs. Chen called her into her office. "I've been impressed with your work," Mrs. Chen said. "You're organized, reliable, and the residents trust you. I'm creating a part-time position, 15 hours a week, minimum wage. I know it's not much, but it's a start. You'd be our official donations coordinator. Are you interested? Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, thank you, yes. It was minimum wage, 15 hours a week. Simple math told her it wasn't enough to rent an apartment, but it was income. It was a start. It was proof that she could still be valuable, still contribute something. With her first paycheck, Sarah bought a cheap phone with prepaid minutes. With her second, she opened a bank account and started saving every penny she could. She continued sleeping in her car, but now she had purpose to her days. She had routine. She had people who depended on her. Maria passed her GED exam on the first try. Sarah was there when the results came in, and they celebrated with cake from the grocery store bakery, Sarah's treat. Lucas, now 4 months old, sat on Maria's lap and seemed to understand something good had happened because he smiled and waved his arms excitedly. I'm going to apply to community college, Maria announced. They have a program for single mothers. Childcare assistance, flexible schedules. I could study early childhood education. You'll be amazing, Sarah said and meant it. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Maria said seriously. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that there are still good people in the world. Sarah thought about that night on the bridge, about how close she'd come to stepping off. If she had, she never would have heard Lucas's cry. Never would have found Maria. Never would have discovered that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. 3 months after Sarah started her paid position, Mrs. Chen called her into her office again. This time Sarah felt nervous. Had she done something wrong? Relax, Mrs. Chen said, seeing Sarah's expression. This is good news. One of our full-time staff is moving to another state. I need someone to fill her position. 40 hours a week, benefits, actual salary. The job would involve more responsibility, managing volunteers, overseeing programs, some administrative work. I think you'd be perfect for it, Sarah stared at her. Are you serious? Completely serious. You've proven yourself over these past months. You care about the work, you care about the residents, and you have skills we need. So what do you say? I say yes, Sarah managed. Absolutely yes. With a full-time salary, Sarah could finally afford to rent a room. She found a small place in a shared house with 2 other women. It wasn't fancy, just a bedroom with a shared bathroom and kitchen, but it was hers. The first night she slept in a real bed in a real room, Sarah cried with relief. She bought basic furniture from thrift stores. She hung curtains. She put fresh sheets on the bed. It was the first place she'd had to call her own since losing her apartment. And even though it was small and the walls were thin and she could hear her housemates moving around at all hours, it felt like a palace. Maria was thrilled when Sarah told her about the apartment. Can we visit? She asked. I want Lucas to see where you live. Of course, Sarah said. Anytime. But Maria's time at the shelter was running out. The 3-month limit was approaching, and while Mrs. Chen had given her an extension because she'd been doing so well, eventually Maria would need to find her own place. The problem was, even with her GED, even with job skills training, finding employment and housing as a 17-year-old single mother was nearly impossible. Sarah watched Maria grow increasingly stressed as the deadline approached. Maria had applied to dozens of jobs, but nobody was hiring her. She'd looked at apartments, but landlords took one look at her age and her baby and found excuses not to rent to her. What am I going to do? Maria asked one evening, close to tears. I've done everything right. I got my GED, I've been responsible, but it doesn't matter. Nobody will give me a chance. Sarah held Lucas, who was now 5 months old and getting heavier every day. She thought about how hard she'd worked to get back on her feet, and she'd been an adult with job experience. Maria was trying to do it all while barely past childhood herself. We'll figure something out, Sarah promised. But privately, she was worried too. Then one afternoon, while Sarah was sorting through a new batch of donations, she found something unusual. Most donations were just everyday items, clothes, books, household goods. But this batch included several boxes from an estate sale. The donation slip said the items came from the estate of Eleanor Whitmore, recently deceased. Sarah began unpacking the boxes methodically. Clothes that had been expensive once but were now dated, books with yellowed pages, dishes wrapped in old newspaper, and then in the bottom of the third box, wrapped in cloth, she found an old leather satchel. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, letters tied with ribbon, old documents. She started to set it aside. People's personal papers sometimes got donated by mistake, and she'd need to contact the estate to see if they wanted it back. But then she noticed a sealed envelope tucked into a side pocket. On the front, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To whoever finds this, you were meant to." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick paper. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then I've passed on and my belongings have been donated as I requested. I write this letter in hope that it finds someone who needs it, someone who understands that life can be both beautiful and brutal, and who has chosen to keep going despite everything." Sarah sat down, her heart beating faster, and continued reading. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is my story. 50 years ago, I was where you might be now, lost, alone, and ready to give up. I'd lost my husband to war, my child to illness, and my home to debt. I stood at the edge of a bridge one night, ready to end my pain. But a stranger saw me there and stopped to talk. That stranger didn't try to fix my problems or tell me things would get better. She just sat with me, shared her own story of loss, and reminded me that I wasn't alone in suffering. She saved my life that night, and I never even learned her name. I spent the rest of my life trying to pay forward that kindness. I built a business, made a fortune, and spent it helping others who were struggling. But I always wondered, what happens to my mission when I'm gone? How do I ensure that the kindness continues?" And then I had an idea. I would leave a message for the future, for someone I'd never meet. Someone who would find these words when they needed them most. Someone who, like me, had been saved by an unexpected kindness and wanted to pay it forward. If you're reading this, you're that person. You're working or volunteering somewhere that helps those in need. You've known despair. You've chosen compassion. And I want to help you continue that work. Sarah's hands were shaking now. She kept reading. "In this envelope is a key. It opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown, box number 847. Inside that box, you'll find the details of a trust I've established. The money in that trust is for you, but with one condition. It must be used to help others escape despair just as we both were saved. I don't know who you are or what form your help will take. Maybe you'll start a shelter. Maybe you'll fund scholarships. Maybe you'll simply help one person at a time. The way that stranger helped me. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the kindness continues. Don't let anyone tell you this isn't real or that you don't deserve it. You were meant to find this. Trust in that. And trust that sometimes the universe has a way of connecting people across time, across death, to ensure that love and kindness never really die. Use this gift well. Help others the way you've been helped. And know that somewhere, somehow, I'm grateful that you're the one who found this message. With hope, Eleanor Whitmore." Sarah sat in the storage room, holding the letter, tears streaming down her face. In the envelope was indeed a key, along with a business card for First National Bank and a document with the box number and legal authorizations. It couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. She was probably being scammed, or this was some kind of mistake. But even as she thought these things, another voice inside her said, "You stood on a bridge ready to die, and a baby's cry saved you. You helped a teenage mother, and she helped save you right back. Strange things happen. Miracles happen. Maybe this is yours." Sarah looked at the clock. The bank would close in an hour. She made a decision. She went to Mrs. Chen's office and knocked. "I need to leave early today," Sarah said. "Something's come up." "It's important." Mrs. Chen looked at her curiously but nodded. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know yet," Sarah said honestly, "but I need to find out." The bank was downtown, a solid old building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. Sarah felt completely out of place walking through those heavy glass doors in her thrift store clothes, clutching a worn leather satchel and a letter that promised something too good to be true. She approached the nearest desk where a young man in a crisp suit was typing on a computer. He looked up with a professional smile that faltered slightly when he saw her. Sarah knew what she must look like, someone who didn't belong in a place like this. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. Sarah placed the key on the desk along with Eleanor Whitmore's letter and the authorization documents. "I need to access a safety deposit box. Number 847. The banker picked up the documents, his expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to something like surprise as he read through them. Let me get my manager. Please wait here a moment." Sarah sat in a leather chair that was probably worth more than everything she owned. Her leg bounced nervously. This was insane. She shouldn't be here. This was some kind of mistake, and security would probably escort her out any minute. But then a woman in her 50s approached, her face warm and professional. "Ms. Mitchell? I'm Patricia Reeves, the branch manager. I understand you're here regarding the Whitmore estate." "Yes, but I think there might be some mistake." "No mistake," Patricia said, sitting down across from her. "We've been holding Mrs. Whitmore's box for 18 months, waiting for someone to present these authorization documents. She was very specific in her instructions. The box and its contents would go to whoever presented this key and these papers." Patricia looked at Sarah with curious eyes. "How did you come by them?" Sarah explained about the donation boxes, about working at the shelter, about finding the satchel with the letter. Patricia listened, nodding occasionally. "That sounds exactly like something Eleanor would do," Patricia said with a sad smile. "She was one of our most generous clients, always thinking of creative ways to help people. I'll need to verify a few things, but if everything checks out, we can access the box today." 20 minutes of paperwork and verification later, Patricia led Sarah into the vault. It was a large room lined with metal boxes of various sizes. Patricia used her key and Sarah's key together to open box 847. "I'll give you some privacy," Patricia said, gesturing to a small private room. "Take all the time you need." Sarah carried the long metal box to the table in the private room, her heart hammering. She opened it slowly. Inside were several items. First, a large envelope marked legal documents. Second, a smaller envelope marked "For you, read first." And third, several bank books and statements. Sarah opened the smaller envelope with trembling fingers. Another letter from Eleanor. "Hello, my friend across time. If you're reading this, then you've been brave enough to follow the first clue. I imagine you're scared. I imagine you think this can't be real. But it is. I'm leaving you 3 things. First, in the envelope marked legal documents, you'll find the deed to a property I own at 423 Riverside Avenue. It's a small commercial building, currently vacant. It was my first business location many years ago, and I've kept it maintained but empty, waiting for the right purpose. Second, you'll find bank statements for a trust account that contains $870,000. This is yours to use, with the condition that it must be used to help others. How you choose to do that is entirely up to you. The legal documents establish you as the sole trustee. Third, and most importantly, I'm leaving you permission. Permission to believe that you deserve this. Permission to accept help. Permission to dream bigger than you've been allowing yourself to dream. I know what it's like to feel unworthy. I know what it's like to think that good things happen to other people, but not to you. I spent years feeling that way after I lost everything. But here's what I learned. Sometimes we have to let ourselves be saved before we can save others. Sometimes we have to accept that we're worthy of kindness even when we don't feel like we are. So accept this gift. Don't question whether you deserve it. You found it because you were meant to find it. You're reading this because you've already proven yourself, by surviving, by choosing compassion, by showing up for others even when you were struggling yourself. Use this wisely. Use it generously. Use it to create something beautiful in this world. And when you do, think of me sometimes and know that I'm grateful our lives intersected even though we never met. With all my hope, Eleanor. Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears flowing freely. Then she opened the legal envelope. Everything was there. The deed to the property already notarized and transferred to her name pending her acceptance. The trust documents establishing her as the trustee with full authority over the funds. Bank statements showing exactly $870,000 in an account that would become hers once she completed the final paperwork. It was real. All of it was real. Sarah sat in that small room for a long time, holding the documents, trying to understand what this meant. 8 months ago, she'd been standing on a bridge, ready to die. She'd had nothing, no hope, no future, no reason to keep going. And now this, but it wasn't just luck. It wasn't just coincidence. Sarah thought about the chain of events that had led her here. If she'd stepped off that bridge, she never would have heard Lucas cry. If she hadn't helped Maria, she never would have started volunteering at the shelter. If she hadn't been working in the donation room, she never would have found Eleanor's satchel. Every moment had led to this one, as if her life had been carefully orchestrated by an invisible hand. Or maybe, Sarah thought, it was simpler than that. Maybe kindness just led to more kindness. Maybe choosing to help someone, even when you could barely help yourself, set something in motion that eventually came back around. Sarah gathered the documents and returned to Patricia's desk. "What do I need to do to accept this?" Patricia smiled. "Just sign here and here and here. We'll process everything and have the trust transferred to an account in your name within a few days. The property deed just needs to be recorded, which we can handle for you." Sarah signed the papers, her hand steady despite the surreal nature of what she was doing. When it was done, Patricia shook her hand. "Congratulations," Patricia said. "Eleanor would be happy knowing her legacy is in good hands. Based on what you've told me, I think you understand exactly what she wanted." Sarah walked out of the bank in a daze. The afternoon sun felt too bright, the traffic too loud, the world too vivid. She'd come here expecting nothing, maybe hoping for a small amount of money that could help her get further back on her feet. Instead, she was walking away with enough to change not just her life, but many lives. She drove back to the shelter, her mind racing. What would she do with this? Eleanor had left it open-ended, use it to help others. But how? There were so many needs, so many ways to help. The responsibility felt enormous. When she arrived at the shelter, Maria was in the common room with Lucas, who was playing with soft blocks on a mat. Maria looked up and immediately noticed something different about Sarah. "What happened?" Maria asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah sat down next to her and in a low voice told her everything. About the donation box, the letter, the safety deposit box, the money, the building. Maria's eyes grew wider with each detail. That's incredible," Maria whispered. "Sarah, do you know what this means?" "I think so," Sarah said slowly. "I think it means I can do something real, something lasting." "What are you going to do?" Sarah looked around the shelter. At the worn furniture, the crowded rooms, the women and children who were trying so hard to build better lives with so few resources. She thought about how Mrs. Chen stretched every dollar, how there was never enough space, never enough support. "I want to create a place," Sarah said, the idea forming even as she spoke. "A place where people like us, people like you and me, can find more than just a temporary bed. I want to create a real program. Job training, counseling, childcare, help with education. Everything someone needs to actually break the cycle, not just survive another day." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "You could do that. With that much money, you really could. And you're going to help me," Sarah said firmly. "You wanted to study early childhood education, right? We're going to need someone who knows what it's like, who can relate to the mothers coming through. Who better than you?" "Sarah, I haven't even started college yet, so you'll start. I'll make sure you can, and when you're ready, you'll come work with me." Over the next few days, Sarah could barely sleep. Her mind was constantly working, planning, imagining. She visited the property at 423 Riverside Avenue. It was a 2-story brick building in an older neighborhood. Not fancy, but solid. Eleanor had kept it well maintained. The ground floor was open space that could be converted into offices, classrooms, and a childcare center. The second floor could be divided into transitional housing units. Sarah met with Patricia at the bank again to better understand the trust structure and what she could and couldn't do with the money. She met with contractors to get estimates on renovations. She met with lawyers to understand the regulations around running a nonprofit organization. It was overwhelming, but Sarah found she loved every moment of it. For the first time since her mother died, she had purpose that extended beyond just getting through the day. She was building something, creating something that would outlast her, something that would help people for years to come. She told Mrs. Chen about her plans. Mrs. Chen listened carefully, asked good questions, and then said something Sarah hadn't expected. "I think I'm ready to retire," Mrs. Chen said. "I've been running this shelter for 30 years and I'm tired. But I've been afraid to stop because I didn't know what would happen to the women and children who need this place. Now I know. They'll have somewhere even better to go. They'll have what you're building." "Mrs. Chen, I couldn't have done any of this without you," Sarah said. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You taught me how to really see people and their needs. And you took those lessons and ran with them," Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile. "That's all a teacher can ask for. But I want to help you if you'll let me. I know every agency in this city, every funding source, every regulation and requirement. Let me consult on your project. Let me help you make this the best it can be." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I would be honored." The project took shape quickly. Sarah named it Eleanor's house in honor of the woman whose gift had made it all possible. She hired contractors to renovate the building. She worked with Mrs. Chen to develop comprehensive programs, not just housing, but job training partnerships with local businesses, Educational support, mental health counseling, childcare services. Maria became her first unofficial employee. While still living at the shelter and preparing to start community college, Maria helped Sarah plan the childcare center, thinking about what mothers really needed, what would make their lives easier, what kind of support would help them focus on building their futures without constantly worrying about their children. 3 months into the renovation, Sarah invited Maria to the site. The building was still a work in progress, but the bones of what it would become were visible. The ground floor would have a welcoming reception area, several classroom spaces, a large childcare center with age-appropriate play areas, offices for counselors and caseworkers. The second floor would have 10 small but private family units, each with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette. "This is going to change lives," Maria said quietly, walking through the space with Lucas in her arms. He was 7 months old now, alert and curious, looking around at the construction with wide eyes. "It already has," Sarah said. "It changed mine." That evening, Sarah stood alone in the building after the construction crew had left. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore, a woman she'd never met who had somehow reached across death to save her. She thought about the chain of kindness that had brought her here, the stranger who saved Eleanor who saved Sarah, Sarah who saved Maria, and now all of them working together to save countless others. She pulled out her phone and, for the first time in months, looked at the photos of her mother. In one, her mother was laughing, her eyes crinkled with joy. Sarah remembered when that photo was taken. It had been a good day before the cancer, when everything had seemed possible. "I found something worth holding on to, Mom," Sarah whispered to the photo. "I kept my promise." And standing there in the empty building that would soon be full of hope, Sarah felt her mother's presence like a warm embrace. She'd survived the darkness. She'd found purpose in pain. She'd learned that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. The grand opening of Eleanor's house happened on a Saturday morning in May, 10 months after Sarah had found the letter in that donated satchel. The spring sun was bright, warming the crowd that gathered outside the renovated building. Sarah had invited everyone who'd been part of her journey. Mrs. Chen, of course, and the staff from the women's shelter. Patricia from the bank. Maria and Lucas. Even Jennifer, the social worker who'd first introduced Sarah to Maria at the hospital. There was a ribbon across the front door, and Sarah stood before it with a large pair of scissors, feeling more nervous than she'd expected. She wasn't used to being in front of crowds. She'd prepared a short speech, but now, looking at all these faces, the words seemed inadequate. "A year ago," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly, "I had lost everything. I'd lost my mother, my job, my home, my hope. I was ready to give up completely. But then I heard a baby cry, and that sound changed everything." She glanced at Maria, who stood near the front holding Lucas. He was almost a year old now, a happy toddler who babbled constantly and was learning to walk. He waved at Sarah and she smiled. "I learned something in my darkest moment. I learned that we're never as alone as we think we are. That kindness exists in unexpected places, that sometimes helping someone else is what saves us. And I learned that gifts can come from the most surprising sources." Sarah told them about Eleanor Whitmore, about the letter that had given her not just money, but permission to dream bigger than she'd thought possible. She explained that Eleanor's house would be more than just a shelter. It would be a comprehensive support system for families trying to rebuild their lives. The women and children who come here won't just have a place to sleep, Sarah explained. They'll have access to job training, counseling, education support, childcare, and most importantly, time. Time to heal, time to plan, time to build a foundation that will last. We won't have arbitrary time limits. Each family will work with a case manager to develop an individual plan, and they'll stay until they're truly ready to thrive on their own. Sarah cut the ribbon and everyone applauded. The doors opened and people flooded in to tour the facility. Sarah watched them admire the bright, cheerful childcare center, where children's artwork already decorated the walls. They visited the training rooms equipped with computers and resources for job searches and resume building. They saw the upstairs apartments, small but clean and private, each one a fresh start for a family in need. In the lobby, Sarah had hung a large photograph of Eleanor Whitmore, found among the papers in the safety deposit box. Eleanor had been beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Below her photo, Sarah had mounted a plaque with Eleanor's own words, Kindness never dies. It just gets passed forward. The first family moved in the following Monday. Carmen was a 32-year-old mother of two who'd fled from a dangerous situation with nothing but her children and a garbage bag of clothes. Her sons, ages 4 and 7, were shy and quiet, their eyes too old for their years. Sarah showed them to their apartment, and when Carmen saw the small but complete kitchen, the clean bathroom, the beds already made up with fresh sheets, she broke down crying. "You're safe here," Sarah told her quietly. "You and your boys. Take all the time you need." Over the next several weeks, Eleanor's house filled up. Each family had a story that broke Sarah's heart. Stories of loss, abuse, bad luck, and broken systems. But they also had hope. They had determination. They had each other. Maria, who'd started her first semester at community college, worked part-time in the childcare center. She had a natural gift with children, able to calm even the most frightened toddler with her gentle voice and patient manner. Watching her work, Sarah felt proud of how far Maria had come from that desperate girl under the bridge. "You know what's funny?" Maria said one afternoon while they were sitting in Sarah's office. Lucas was napping in a portable crib in the corner. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd ruined everything by getting pregnant so young, by ending up on the streets. But if none of that had happened, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't be doing work I love. It's strange how the worst things can lead to the best things." "I know exactly what you mean," Sarah said. "I stood on a bridge wanting to die, and that moment led me here. It's like, sometimes you have to fall apart completely before you can rebuild yourself into something stronger." Word spread quickly about Eleanor's house. Social workers started referring clients. Local businesses partnered with them for job training. Volunteers showed up offering to teach everything from computer skills to cooking to financial literacy. A local college offered free GED prep classes on site, but Sarah's favorite part was the children. The building was always filled with the sound of kids playing, laughing, learning. She'd set up the childcare center so that mothers could attend classes or go to job interviews, knowing their children were safe, happy, and learning. She saw those children transform over weeks and months, from scared and withdrawn to confident and playful. Lucas was practically the mascot of Eleanor's house. At a year old, he was walking now, toddling from room to room, giving everyone his brilliant smile. The other children adored him, and he loved the attention. Sometimes Sarah would watch him play and remember that night, hearing his cry pierce through her despair. That cry had saved her life. She'd saved his and Maria's, but they'd saved her right back. 6 months after opening, Sarah got a call from a reporter at the local newspaper. They wanted to do a story about Eleanor's house and the unusual way it had been funded. Sarah was hesitant. She'd never wanted publicity. But she thought about Eleanor's message about kindness being passed forward. Maybe sharing the story would inspire others.